the ultimate idea lab is supposed to be the university, right? The university is supposed to exist for a singular goal. Maybe they're a secondary, but the key goal is the pursuit of truth, right? And I think one of the ways that, is most illustrative to the point you're making in the book is to look at what has happened to universities. And you dedicate almost an entire chapter in your book to the problem of universities today and the way that they've sort of been transformed from idea labs into either echo chambers or idea supremacists chambers. You'll tell me the difference. And you do this with this amazing illustration that you call the social justice horse. And it's sort of similar to the idea of the Trojan horse, right? Except you have this social justice horse, which you draw with this little very cute rainbow mane and tail. And the social justice horse says very, very lovely, progressive sounding things. Like the horse will say, an inclusive environment. And yet the actual idea that they're smuggling in under the idea of an inclusive environment is disagree with us and we'll smear you, for example. Or the social justice horse will say something like diversity statements. But really the thing being brought in under this rhetoric is, as you put it, McCarthyist political litmus test and loyalty oaths, right? And this sort of theory of the social justice horse or the mechanics of the social justice horse is happening all over the country, not just in elite schools, but in schools coast to coast, everywhere in between. And we've gotten to a point in which something like 52% of college students, according to one recent survey, say they always or often refrain from expressing views on political and social issues in classrooms because of concern for how it will be perceived, for concern to their reputation, for their concern to their grades. How did we get here? How was this social justice horse so unbelievably effective?
So one of the first things I wanted to do when I was getting into this, very spicy topic of social justice is I said, we need two terms here because there's two completely different things that are called social justice. The first is what I would call liberal social justice, liberal meaning classic liberal. And so we talked about the liberal house, right? This idea of liberal, this house we live in that has liberal rules and liberal norms and liberal laws. And liberal social justice, its goal is to make the house more perfect. It says liberalism is great. The Constitution is awesome, but we don't always succeed in keeping its promises. There are flaws in the house. This awesome house has some people or policies or norms have made it weaker and have made it actually some people in this house are being treated unfairly in a way they're not supposed to be treated in the liberal house. This was, of course, what Martin Luther King, in his I Have a Dream speech, he talked about a promissory note and how the U.S. has defaulted on its check to Black Americans, right? So that's him saying this house is great, but Black Americans are not being treated the way this house is supposed to treat them. Let's fix the house. That's the goal. Let's get the best house it can be. And so not only does it have liberal goals, right, which is he wants more liberalism, but it uses liberal means, right? The civil rights movement was all about free assembly and free speech and protest and all of these tools of liberalism. They're tools that the House gives you to fix the House. And, this idea of colorblindness is a very liberal idea, individualism, right? It's not about the color of your skin. It's about who you are as a person. This idea of your character is another way of valuing individuals. Each individual is a sacred thing, period. Doesn't matter what else is about them. And so that's liberal social justice. This is the movement behind gay marriage in 2012. This is the movement behind women's suffrage back in the 1910s. So it's a great tradition in the U.S., and it's something that most Americans, for sure progressive, but even a lot of conservatives are very proud of, this movement. Now, what's the other thing? There's another thing called social justice right now, which is what I call social justice fundamentalism, otherwise known as wokeness. And it's important because wokeness itself sounds derogatory. It sounds like it has a lot of cultural baggage there. So I try to just use a different term to describe what it actually is, which I call social justice fundamentalism, or SJF. And this movement is self-proclaimed outside the house with a wrecking ball.
The house is evil because the house was built by flawed people.
And it's rotten to its core. Its foundation is built to uphold the power of the powerful, in this case, white supremacy or the patriarchy, and that liberalism itself is an invention of those ideas in order that has the, whether it was intended or not, it has the property of being exploitative and of enhancing inequality and of entrenching the power of the powerful and holding down the oppressed. And so that's a fundamental disagreement. Liberal social justice and social justice fundamentalism have opposite, not different, but opposite goals. One wants to make the house better, and one wants to break the house down. They use words like liberate from this whole system. It's very revolutionary, much more revolutionary than liberal social justice. Liberal social justice wants to overhaul norms and policies and laws. Social justice fundamentalism wants to overhaul the whole house, just level it and build something new. And that's okay. That's the thing, is what liberalism is awesome, because in a liberal democracy, it actually has room for even critique of itself. Sure, bring it in. Bring it in. You hate liberalism, bring it into the discussion. You're allowed to be here. Go make your arguments. Do whatever you want. Try to persuade people. Maybe we're all missing something. Sure, go for it. What's not okay is illiberal tactics. And that kind of goes together, because if you think the house is bad, well, you also think that the same tools that were used by the civil rights movement, those liberal tools like free speech and all those things, that those things are bad too. Black feminist Audre Lorde says you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. So there's a lot in that statement. It's the idea that, A, this is the master's house. It doesn't belong to all of us. It is a house for slave masters. And therefore, the tools themselves are rotten, just as rotten as the house itself. And so they will be hostile to all kinds of liberal things. Free speech. So free speech is actually dangerous, right? It's allowing the platforming of dangerous ideas. Not the First Amendment necessarily, but the culture of free speech is bad. The U.S. and the West, they're bad. The group is what matters, much more than the individual. And that's why they will talk about, they will make broad generalizations about white people and black people. They treat these groups as monoliths. There's a common enemy kind of tone to it instead of the much more classic liberal common humanity tone. Equality of opportunity is a liberal staple. But social justice fundamentalism believes that because groups are the same, there's no such thing as equality of opportunity that doesn't lead to equality of outcome. And so they actually are for equality of outcome. That is very anti-liberal, because it's, you can't have freedom with equality of outcome, enforced equality of outcome. So there's a lot of these examples, but again, it is like you mentioned with the social justice horse. It's tricky, right? It's a little bit. They don't quite go out and say this. They'll say we want a safe space, but really what they're saying is a space that doesn't have free speech in it, and where our ideas are treated as sacred, or and they'll use things like the harm principle and saying that, well, this thing is harmful, so therefore it must be stopped. So back to universities. Back to universities. What's happened is this, social SJF was in the 60s, liberal social justice was the major thing at universities, right? You have Berkeley, you have free speech protests, right? And we want more liberalism. But there was also developing in the corners of universities this concept of SJF, this neo-Marxist kind of take on social justice. And what's happened much more recently is, as universities have gone from kind of pluralistic with some conservatives, more progressive, but some conservatives, it's transitioned to being almost entirely progressive. And the numbers are stark. The ratio of professors left to right has gone from like 4-1 to, in some departments, 17-1, 40-1, sometimes 100-1. And so when an environment is kind of purple, it has a good defenses against extreme components, both from red and blue. But when an environment becomes bright blue and things get really kind of tribal, it becomes weak. It develops a soft spot to kind of illiberalism of its own color. So social justice fundamentalism has taken advantage of this transition to political purity at a university and has been able to rise up and actually institute its own values. And so, like you said, the university is supposed to be the ultimate idea lab, right? Veritas is written on the gate above the university. And for Veritas to happen, you have to have not just ideas put out, but people who will challenge those ideas, right? Or else there's no way for a group of people to find truth together if no one's allowed to disagree. But so as SJF has risen up, it has created new rules and has basically said, we live in a small echo chamber that now actually is going to be the rules of the entire campus. And ideas that disagree with SJF in particular, with our tenets, are going to lead to firings or to ostracism or to investigation of students. And that's and that completely topples the whole point of a university on its head.
You've been listening to Honestly with Barry Weiss, a production of The Free Press. Find the full episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you believe in fearless journalism that pulls no punches, support us. You can do that by visiting thefp.com and becoming a subscriber today.